Good afternoon. It is wonderful to welcome you to the 2021 Heritage Service sponsored by the Brethren in Christ Historical Society. We're very pleased to come to you electronically this year. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, this has been the second year that we have needed to do this, rather than where we often come from, one of our historic meeting places, which is pictured behind me. We do welcome you as we are here, and we trust that you will experience something very valuable to you in participating in this service. I'd like to begin with a word of prayer and then say a few more things about the content of what we're doing. Father, thank you so much for this day, for your love and your goodness and grace. We have lived as a people not only in our own country, but around the world in a very difficult time since last we were together in this way. We didn't realize just what all would be in front of us. But as you have shown us the way, we have tried to respond as your people, and we have worked with one another throughout this year and these experiences. Now, bless our time together, and Spirit, move us as you would for this time of sharing, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. In our spring issue of our newsletter, we put out a call for stories about how churches responded to COVID-19, as well as thinking back 100 years ago to how people responded and what the kinds of stories might be out of the influenza pandemic of that time. Sometimes when we put out a call, there are many people who respond. Sometimes the response is much less. That's what happened to me this time. I was delighted to receive an article about Grace Edna Ramsdale Adams, a young person who at the age of 28 died in the influenza pandemic. That article will show up on our blog, and in an edited portion, a smaller portion of it will show up in our next newsletter. But we're delighted today to have two churches that are from the central Pennsylvania area who both had a chance to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. One earlier in the pandemic and then one a bit later into the experience of the pandemic. And so we're going to hear stories from these two churches, and then we will enter into some conversation about things we've learned, some difficulties we've experienced, some great things that have happened, as we seek to hear just what is it that God is saying to the church. We also, as a historical society, are using this time to be able to record this part of the story for history. And so we are very appreciative of the time. We're very glad to have from the Grantham congregation today, Patty Hess and Harriet Bixler, who've both been involved very much in a project that they had, and it was early in the time of the pandemic. And so, Patty and Harriet, I look to you to share the story that comes out of your experience.
I'm here today representing what came to be known as the Mask Force. It began with me needing to make a cloth mask for my granddaughter in March of 2020 so she could go to the doctor. From there, it expanded to family, friends, and then church friends like Harriet and Dale Bixler. Because of my involvement with Paxton Ministries as their volunteer coordinator, Jody Smiley, the executive director, reached out to me and asked if we could help provide Mass to them. I then subsequently reached out to my Paxton Outreach support team, missional community, for some help. And from there, Mask Force began with 6 seamstresses, 5 from Grantham, and 1 a friend who accidentally received my group email, but I think God had a plan in that, because that person was an excellent seamstress, and she came to be a very integral part of our team. And she came from a Catholic church, and you will see later, we actually provided that church with Mass as well. So we eventually grew to about 15 who contributed making Mass, and in all, there were 26 people who either sewed or donated items, who delivered or served as couriers going between Messiah Village and my front door that had a contactless bin, frequently disinfected, as well as the contents. So we all worked together and produced quite a few Mass in that period of time. We also used Grantham's email from the pastor under the body life information as an offering for free Mass to anyone who needed them. And that included all ages, and that included friends, family, anyone in the community. And this was at a time when, you recall, the PPE was very difficult, if not impossible, to get. From there, we began to reach out to our ministry partners, other churches and organizations, and eventually, as you can see on the graphic, to date, we have made 1,328 masks. So the summary of that distribution is essentially 3 of Grantham's ministry partners, 1 nonprofit agency in Harrisburg, 4 churches, including Grantham, 5 local businesses, 1 local college, and 1 fire department. So anyone who was involved, whether sewing or providing supplies, was placed on my email distribution list. And from April 8th to October 26th of 2020, I provided 19 detailed email updates that included our weekly summaries of numbers of Mass provided, the new requests that were coming in, and in many ways, reflections on what was happening. It was almost somewhat of a personal blog for me. For example, one of those communications. On April 12th, in my second email address, I said, "My last update to you was on April 8th. In only 4 days, you have done so much to bless others with these Mass made with God's love. Aside from sewing, there are others providing supplies like fabric and elastic and pipe cleaners for nose pieces, running errands and deliveries. Working together, albeit separately, has been such a privilege to me. You inspire me with your giving hearts and mission to help where you can when we are confined." On April 19th, I subsequently reported to this group we had delivered 524 Mass in 3 weeks, 178 of which were in that week alone. So it was beginning to move very quickly. So the evolution of making the Mass was very interesting. Once stores were closed, it was very difficult to get and obtain sewing supplies. But we used what we had, and we shared what we had. And the exchange of Mass and supplies was done, like I said, from this bin at my front door. And we also delivered Mass to those who couldn't get to my front door or were afraid to get out. Each of the ladies sewing had their own style they made, And we got creative when elastic and bias tape disappeared from the shelves, where the lady provided crocheted ties. One of the lady's machines broke down, but she became one who cut the fabric, greatly facilitating our progress. Some did partial sewing, and others added the elastic and the pleats. Our goal was to create an inventory to draw from when the requests came in, so we could be responsive. And to this day, I actually pull from that supply, although it is dwindling. Since the late summer, early fall, access to novelty prints and comfortable elastic and nose pieces and elastic or silicone stops for the elastic became available and made the mask so much more wearable. So as I look back at the Mask Force effort, had I not kept track of the numbers provided, I never would have believed we did what we did. What is also incredible is that among 26 individuals, together we were able to share our resources without direct church funding, although that was offered, because if anyone out there is a seamstress, you full know we all have drawers and closets full of supplies. And we obtained 3 small cash donations in the process. So while people offered to pay for the Mass, we wanted this to be a ministry to offer free Mass to anyone who needed it. God worked out the miracles along the way to accomplish that. And in retrospect, now knowing the importance of Mass in preventing COVID transmission, doing this, doing what we could at a time we felt helpless, was perhaps the most meaningful part of the process. So we have a couple of additional slides of the process. My upstairs was translated into a clearinghouse of masks of sorts. This represents mask orders for the LAE BIC Church in York Springs, where Pastor Mike Holland would provide a list of needs, and we would fill them all in bags so we could keep things sanitary. We provided a lot of masks to our homeless ministry in Harrisburg, and we also maintain a supply in what is called Jewel's Closet within the Grantham Church. The picture on the left are some of the samples of the children's masks. That they're very small, but they were very difficult to get. So it was a blessing to be able to not only make masks early on for our little ones, but as school ramped up, it was very critical, and we produced quite a few from summer to fall. And this is a family who we provided a whole family size worth of masks to. And that's it.
The project that I'm talking about was not one that I was very much involved in personally. And it's not one that was specifically related to COVID, although most of it has taken place during COVID and has brought a certain portion of our church community together. Back in January, well, actually it started in the fall of 2019, when Mennonite Central Committee was preparing to celebrate its 100th anniversary last year and was preparing for the great winter warm-up in January when they were making comforters to send overseas. Jeff Isley, a member of our congregation who is an artist by profession and has directed a lot of community art projects at Grantham, decided that we were going to make comforters as a congregation. So at our Wednesday evening meal, he brought the supplies, and after the meal, people would gather around tables and knot comforters and cut squares and so on. Well, then COVID hit. And that project continued. Even though it was a community project, it was now being done separately and continued to this day, actually. Families with kids, sisters who were in bubbles together, individuals, each working out of their own homes. Again, it was a matter of collecting the supplies and having each person do what they could. Some knotted comforters, some cut squares. I think it takes 64 squares per quilt, per comforter. And some sewed the squares. And then those would all go back to Jeff, and he would put the batting on and the backing and the binding. Porch drops were the same thing as what Patty was talking about. Jeff would put out a notice on Facebook that he had 3 sewn comforters that needed to be knotted, and people would stop by and pick them up. He would send out periodic email updates, Facebook updates, pictures of, I think, pretty much every comforter that has been made. And to date, there are almost 125. Every time I look at Facebook, he has an update of another one. So who knows what the number is right now. So this has been an interesting project, a way of bringing people together, even when we have had to be separate, and to help those who are less advantaged than we are around the world.
Thank you both so much for sharing the story. And this comes from the early part of COVID-19. So we're dropped back, and as was just said, it still continues, but it comes from those earlier months. Another congregation got involved at a little bit later time, almost a year later in some ways, and we're very pleased to have representatives of the Meeting House with us. Pastor Bob Beatty and Bruce Spurgeon are here, and they're going to share some of the story of the Meeting House and how they got involved when vaccines started to become available and what happened with that. So, gentlemen, share with us.
Great, thanks, Ken. It was really interesting at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. I remember our director of operations, he came to me and he said, Bob, there's potential for us to do, that we might want to open our building for vaccines to be done here. He said, if that's possible, that would be wonderful. And in the middle of all that, it kept getting later and later. But then we started hearing of people needing to get vaccines, but they were having a really rough time getting scheduled for that. And that's where Bruce entered into the picture. There were actually 2 Bruces in our congregation, Bruce and Bruce, who said, we want to take it upon ourselves to help people get signed up to get vaccinated. And that one piece, combined with the other piece of a member of our congregation who's a pharmacist in the area, began to get vaccine and needed places to give them, that these 2 things came together, and Bruce and Brian began to use the facility here at the Meeting House to provide the vaccinations for people and get them signed up. And so at that point, I'm just going to turn it to Bruce because he is the man who helped to make all of this happen and organize it in just amazing ways. And we're just deeply grateful for all the volunteers and help that you've provided in that. And so take us through what happened once the need was known and you're jumping in and helping that to happen.
Okay. Yeah, and you can tell that Bob's a pastor because he immediately passes the credit to other people. But the way this started really was the leadership of this church. And then Bruce Hartman and I, that's the other Bruce, had done some ministry things primarily with men, but just felt like, gosh, there's a pandemic going on. The things that we would typically do, we couldn't. And then Bruce, who is a retired computer specialist, he and I got to talking, so we said, well, hey, we can help people get signed up, as it was very difficult in the beginning. And then, of course, Brian Gobin and his family, who run Quality Care Pharmacy, were looking for a facility, because when you think about it, there's no space in a pharmacy for the people to wait 15 minutes after their shot. So that's how the church, I guess, became operationally involved. And it really took off from there. Just a couple of numbers. We've had over 100,000 shots given, so roughly 50,000 people have gotten shots through this program. We've been able to help those people. But one of the things that's really so church and community oriented with this is that we now have a list of 165 volunteers on our list who help get people checked in, fill out the paperwork, watch them, and just kind of encourage people through this, as some people are very nervous about getting any kind of a shot. So that's been really great. Over 6,000 hours have been donated through the volunteers, and it's just been a real, shall we say, pharmaceutical community church coming together to make this happen. It's just been a great thing. One of the things that I've seen is we've really, as our church and as many churches throughout Brethren in Christ, there's been a lot of focus on, shall we say, the underserved community. And this is really something that we saw here. So Ryan Brown and the what I'd call the ministerium, the group of pastors here in town, got together and started this. There were several pastors who felt like their parishioners didn't want shots. They were concerned for various reasons. So they came, and through this group, we were able to get them shots basically as soon as they were, shall we say, state mandated. As you all know, we had, medical people went first, and then age groups and so on and so forth. So as we could, those pastors got their shots, and once they were vaccinated, they were able to go back to their churches and tell them they were still alive, it worked, and so forth. This led to many clinics, and again, this combination of volunteers and the pharmaceutical people. So they not only did churches, and several of these churches that I know personally, they had 3 or 4 clinics at their church. So the pastors were able to, through their leadership, help people get started, and then kind of the floodgates opened. And you can go to several of the local channels, ABC 27, WGAL, and others did document this for us too. I don't think they did it for us. But it's just been a great thing, and so we were able to do those churches. Turns out that Bruce Hartman's daughter-in-law is Korean American, and that community certainly underserved. Many of those people speak no English. So Bruce's daughter-in-law, Ellen, translated everything into Korean, got that posted up, and we were able to get more than 400 people from the Korean American community here in Harrisburg done. And a lot of other smaller, what we would typically refer to, I guess, today as underserved communities have been covered by this. And there's just been hundreds of really heartwarming stories, but I don't think we'll try to go through all of those here this morning.
And so just a question, you talked about volunteers with space. The church made available space for this, and how long did that continue? Or if you might just say a word yet.
Yeah, we were glad to use the lobby of the sanctuary part of our facility. It quickly began to start off on Saturday mornings, and then it would increase longer and longer days on Saturdays, and then we began to see the need for through the week meetings. And pretty soon it was clear that the lobby in our facility was not going to be large enough, and there's an abandoned, or I don't know that it's abandoned, but a large old Kmart store across the street that became available for the clinic to move there. And so all the volunteers, hundreds of them, moved over there and were faithful then to be doing these clinics certainly on Saturdays, but then it began to be Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays and Saturdays, and to get that many people through was truly remarkable. But the heart of the community that came together and those volunteers that made that happen, it was neat to just be one step of the process. That's all that we played, was just what was before us, and people like Bruce and so many others did just a wonderful job of facilitating that and moving it to the place that Brian then, from the pharmaceutical viewpoint, was able to provide just a remarkable care for our community here, and for many that came into this area from across Pennsylvania and even out of state to get their shots. It was truly remarkable.
Thank you. I have a regular doctor's appointment twice a year, and I went to see my doctor, and I mentioned about some things, and we got talking about COVID, and then said a couple things, and he said, I just can't figure this out. All these people keep coming in and saying, oh yeah, I had my shot. I went to this church over here, and I had my shot there. And I talked then a little bit about the relationship between the church and this pharmacy members of both, and some other business people within our congregation. And he said, thank your congregation for what they are doing. And that was a word that I was delighted to bring back to our leadership here. But so here is masks, and the numbers and numbers of masks, and I appreciate it so much, as was said, in the days when you couldn't get PPE. If you go back and listen to the news runs, you'll hear that again and again. The church, in the people of Grantham and others, just stepped right in. And then at a later point in the beginning of really trying to make vaccines available, the church was available because we were locked down. Yeah, the space was available at that time, and it wasn't, as I recall, it wasn't until the church was able to start to gather again that the space here got shut down, and then things opened up at another location. Well, this is two congregations. I'd like to just share one other word. I have been working for another one of our organizations, and that's Brethren in Christ U.S. Missions. It becomes the denominational entity for us. And we have also been sharing in this time of COVID-19. And so in a request that I made to our financial department, I said, well, give me the numbers. How much have we collectively done? And so this was the number I was given. In 2020, we sent about $57,500 related to COVID out of the Global Compassion Funds. So over $57,000 collectively we were able to do in terms of ministry. And it looked like about 10 countries or locations were touched by those distributions, as well as we denominationally were able to participate in Mennonite World Conference's COVID response. And so in that response, it went even further. And even this morning, as I was in another meeting, and we're recording this, I just give it away, we're recording this on another day than Sunday, but in a meeting I was in, we approved some further distributions of funds related to needs that have developed out of COVID. So here's a story. This is before us, and I'd just like to open now for all of us to enter into a little bit of what we learned through this. I'd like to ask the question in two broad ways. First will be, what are some of the problems that we encountered in the midst of doing this engagement, what I'm going to call social engagement. Then we're going to talk about some of the benefits. And you've already heard some of those things as we told our individual stories. But I'd like to come back to that. So this time it's an open question. We're not necessarily going right down the line. Who would want to speak just a little bit about some of the problems that you encountered? I think, Patty, I heard you talking about problems about just getting material.
Yes, we had a very difficult time with some of the supplies. As we were making masks, we would run out of those supplies. We would try to make do in creative ways, like I said. Some things worked, some didn't. We tried to extend the life of elastic by cutting it in half. That didn't work, it would fray. Every now and then I will see a mask that had been made from the beginning, still in use, which warms my heart. But for the most part, it was when things shut down and we used up our supplies. How did we make do? Interestingly enough, we used sheets. I even eyed up some of my husband's plaid shirts since men's fabrics were in short supply. But I didn't have to resort to that.
Thank you. Someone else? Problems encountered down the road. Harriet?
I don't know that this is really a problem, but one of the things that we tried to do with the mask project was to ask local businesses if they could use help back in those days when it was very difficult to get PPE. And I remember going into the Turkey Hill Minute Mark near my house and another convenience market not very far from the church. And they kind of looked at me like I had two heads. You know, you're coming in asking if we need masks. But what was really heartening about that was that then when I went back to deliver the masks that they had said that they wanted, in the one case in particular, I felt like the gentleman that took the bag of masks that I had was just deeply moved by this. Why would a church do this? And you know, into each of the bags we put a little tiny flyer from our Pastor David, you know, just explaining what we were doing and why. And who knows what came out of that, but it was very moving for me to go into that place after he had looked at me like I might have been a little crazy and was moved to see that we did in fact follow through and came with masks.
If I could mention something else that became a very interesting thing coordinating this effort, and that was how to weigh the demand against what we potentially could put out for the community. And interestingly enough, somehow, and I know that was God's way of somehow coming up with the materials, people delivering masks that I wasn't expecting them, or responding to one of the email requests that came in. So coordinating something like that, yes, a person might have done it, but I just truly feel that God had the greater project in mind, and He's the one that coordinated the needs against what was actually produced in the end.
Bruce?
Yeah, I think that, just in listening here, is that I think Christ has taught us that to view things as opportunities and challenges rather than problems, which is certainly what you guys did. It's just amazing to think about that and to really look at it as, God at work. We certainly ran into, lots of issues in terms of, did we have enough space, as pastors already talked about. We started with 650 the first Saturday, which at that time was just a huge number. And gradually we grew to the point where it was just difficult and we needed another space. And about that time, Brian was in contact with Dave Hook, another member of the church here, who's in real estate. And Dave was able to tell him that there was already a negotiation going on for the vacant Kmart. And so we were able to make that transition. And again, that was another problem turned into an opportunity. We just got a tremendous turnout of people to move it over there. Shut it down on a Friday night here, opened it up on a Saturday morning there, and did over 1,000 people. So God really did turn these problems, into, opportunities and challenges. But one of the stories that I'll tell about a problem was when we first opened up, especially as we got to the people who were, shall we say, age-related, people had to sit for 15 minutes after their shot. The problem was, if you want to call it that, was that people hadn't seen each other for 9 months or a year. And so we literally had to go through and, shall we say, kick people out because it became just like a great place to visit, as people would see people they hadn't seen for a long time across the community. It was not just a church thing. So again, another great thing to see from a community and church standpoint.
Yeah, I think one of the large overarching continued challenges that we have is the polarization of our society, especially around COVID and the different pieces that has played, including vaccinations. One of the pieces I've been so thankful to watch is the ability for people to come together in service to one another and through this, because of Jesus, serving each other, even at times that maybe they weren't certain themselves of what the big picture that they even felt about vaccinations. And so they were able to serve regardless of their personal maybe inclinations, but to care for one another enough to be able to overlook those differences that they might feel and still love and care for each other. That for me may have been the most beautiful expression of what it looks like for the hands and feet of Jesus to be able to care deeply for one another and for the community of people around them, is to lay down our own stuff in order to journey along with others that are experiencing life differently. That for me was probably the thing that gave me the most hope in us moving forward and seeing how we continue to process through the difficulties and the challenges that exist for us, certainly in the church, but even larger cultural realities. How do we do that well? And this moment of history gave us a moment to see that happen and to see the beauty of what can happen when we do that well.
Thank you. We're going to move to benefits received. I was thinking quite a bit about scriptural base and other things that really help us, and so the first thing that came to mind for me was God's command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord your God. And those two commands that on them hang all of the law and the prophets, as it would say in Romans. And that place of, as you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. People touching people, and in fact, we've been ministering in the name of Jesus. So maybe there's a story or two that you'd like to share about something that just really was the benefit that grew out of this. And we'd just like to hear a couple of these as we just come soon to a conclusion of the conversation. But please, if you have something more.
I'll speak up and share once I hold the mic to my mouth. One of the things that really has surprised me the most is how a simple mask became an outreach ministry. It engaged people with different talents. Some would think, oh, you just sew, or you can cut fabric, or you can drive the vehicle to deliver something. Collectively, that group of people became the ministry, became the mask force. And as I said, I was surprised to see the impact of, after counting all of these masks tediously, along the way that not only did we provide numbers, but we provided something for those of us engaged. And I asked a few of the ladies how they felt and what impact it had on them being a part of something that would seem so simple. Some of the responses quickly. They were happy to do something to meet the need. It kept them doing something good during a very trying time. It was a blessing to provide the Mass. Gave the opportunity to use the time for something beneficial. Even though not physically together, it felt good to be part of a team working towards a common goal. During lockdown, it gave us a meaningful connection to others from the church. For me, in the end, being part of the Mass Force took me from what I was going, a lot of anxiety and anguish actually during those early days, worrying about what the pandemic meant to all of us. This effort turned into action. And with the whole intent of extending love and concern to those around us, and it did in fact impact the community. Even the bin at my front door, the neighbors would pass by. I can't tell you how many countless masks that I made for the neighborhood, their families. One of the ladies who volunteered at the vaccination site across the street, recently I provided, probably within the last 6 weeks, provided masks to her. And I've had a teacher next door have a little boy in one of the school districts who's developmentally challenged, fixed 2 of his masks. I made him 3 masks, and he was so appreciative of just that simple thing. So in the end, the story is this. It is a reminder to use your talents, whatever they are, for God's purpose. And from it, he does something above and beyond what would ever be imaginable. And that's pretty much where that has left me being part of this.
Let me just chime in with kind of an overarching thing. First of all, I just want to say that 5 of those masks made it their way all the way to Philadelphia to my daughter and her family, thanks to Patty's work. Early on in the pandemic, when church was shut down and we could no longer meet in person, one of the watchwords, I think, throughout the thing from our pastor has been stay connected. Stay connected. It's a little block on the website that I think is still there. And the Mask Project as well as the Comforter Project have been ways to stay connected as a community, as a church community, doing something together, feeling like you are part of something even if you can't be together in person, and of staying connected with each other while we are also connecting ourselves to the larger work, whether it's in our own communities and in our own families or around the world, as with the Comforter Project.
Thank you. Any other benefits? Anything else that you'd like to share?
I've reflected, we have a team of people here in the church that pray and seek that there are places where God is moving in people's lives that may not even be aware that's God moving. And the prayer team was ignited, and they just were practicing the ministry of presence at the clinics, listening, being the eyes and ears to see what was going on, to listening to the stories of people's fears, of the things that they were dealing with in life that went well beyond the pandemic. And I'm amazed to remember, and I think it's a gift in this time to remember, that simply being present is really important to people. And when we're present, if we listen, the voice of God begins to move among us and allows us to hear stories and allows us to hear the fears, allows us to hear the dreams and the hopes of people, that we're able to just come alongside and be hopefully a support, a help, an encouragement for what Jesus is doing. And so as I saw our prayer team doing that and heard stories after story of that happening, deeply grateful for that reminder that the church, part of our greatest gift is simply to be present in the world, be present with people, because the hope of Jesus begins to show up in those times.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would certainly echo that. We, excuse me, again, we have a list of 165 volunteers, and I would guess somewhere between 30 and 40 of those are not church attenders anywhere. Just as people have seen, our service, they've been motivated to serve. And certainly you don't have to be a Christian to serve somewhere, but it really has been great to get to know those people, and really an outreach that I never thought of. We thought of this as, or at least certainly Bruce and I thought of this as a service project, to a great degree, to the community and to the church, but not really an outreach that we'd, that much get to talk to people, but really working with those volunteers and getting to know them and them getting to know the church. The thing that has struck me over this time is, as you can see, I'm a little older than some of the people here. And, I think of this as something that the church would typically have done years ago. And perhaps we've backed off from that. But certainly I know TMH here is being led to really, continue that outreach, because it was a mask. It's a vaccination clinic, which is ongoing. But there are many other things out there. And I certainly, one of the benefits of this is, the eye-opening thing it's been to me as to the opportunities that are out there that I would not have otherwise thought about.
Thank you so very much for sharing. We trust as you've listened today that you've heard the story of people as they have served in places where they could, in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of times of need, and as people have said, at times even when fear was, well, just what would happen here? But as they entered into serving, the Lord took that fear away, and there's that wonderful place of how love of people will transplant and will take away the fear. As a historical society, we're very grateful to be able to record this type of story so that not only may we be challenged by it today, but may we also have the record of what some people did during this time. We continue to be open to receive the stories from across the church about what you did in your own environment during this pandemic, and how you maybe particularly came to a place of service or sharing. And if those things are available, you may be in touch with us to be able to see and to share, and we continue to gather those types of stories as we move along. We thank you again for being part of this time. I thank each one on this panel for their very special sharing and presentation. And I pray now that the blessing of the Lord may be all of yours as we continue in this day. Thank you and goodbye.